How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing good. My computer's on the blink, so I'm borrowing Susan's computer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I might have to get a new one. Austin's working on trying to fix it.
Well, that's one of our main conversations every day is the technology gremlins.
Yeah, I mean, especially coming from another generation, you just don't know what we should know. But it's helpful when it's working.
Turn your camera on, Mike.
It's not on?
No.
Mike, we're all kind of analog people living in a digital world
There you
now.
go.
There you go.
There you are. There you are.
That's very true. I mean, as early as the 80s when the technology started and I'd have synthesizers, anytime a sampler or the synth wouldn't work, I would just shut it off and go to the real acoustic piano. So I never was out of practicing, you know. And I still do that once it's gone down, you know.
That's Mike's grandson, Jacob, in the background, guys.
I was waving at Jacob, yeah.
Oh, I see, yeah. We just had a piano lesson and a trumpet lesson with Max, and we were playing Olio and Orpava.
Mike, I have a couple of questions for you about, you talked about how you got started with jazz piano, and I have some questions about your classical influences as far as who is inspirational to you as far as either classical piano or orchestral music.
Being brought up in Brooklyn, almost every Jewish home had a piano and your mother made you play. And I was kind of lazy, and we had a little telephone in the closet at the time. And when I wouldn't practice, she'd run into the closet to make believe she was calling the piano teacher to cancel the lesson, and that got me back to the piano. So that went on for years. I was not that dedicated, but playing classical, for example, playing classical from 7 to 14 for sure, and then I went on another 3-4 years as I was doing the jazz, and that's the earliest music you're hearing, just like kids who are hearing hip hop or pop music. That's what was in my head. So even when I started playing jazz, within 2-3 years, I was mixing classical with it. And then as the years went on, I was familiar with Bach and Beethoven and Chopin and all that. And then I learned a little Bartók and learned a little about Stravinsky. And as I got older, when I started to like composing music that was atonal, I tuned more into Charles Ives and all those kind of people who, Schoenberg, who were writing atonal music. And now I've come back to tonal, but it's all under my fingers and in my mind, and I act accordingly based on what's needed when, because I do so many different projects, I don't know what will be needed. So fortunately, it's like knowing 10 languages, and I could switch to whichever one I need when I need it. But I'm also still always expanding in each of those areas.
I have a recording of a symphony that he wrote that's very much like an Americana piece, and it's not all that dissonant or bizarre. It's pretty straight ahead, I
know. The thing I liked about him, well, I wrote a homage to him. I could send it to Lynn, and he'll send it to you guys. And I use a little Americana in the middle. I'm working on the railroad just in dedication to him. But he was a stockbroker, as you might know. And because he made a lot of money, he could actually do whatever he wanted. So in the mid-'60s, maybe 63 or 4, I went to a concert in New York City. There were 2 symphonies on stage and 2 conductors, and it was his piece all played at the same time. And they were in different rhythms and different, it was as out as you could get. That's what he heard in his head. Maybe he was reflecting World War I or whatever, but the point is, he didn't care about a commission or getting money, or because he just supported himself, which I look forward to the day that happens to me.
That'd be great. Do did you ever do anything at the Brill with the Brill people at the Brill building, or you know what I mean? That's where all the writers hung out. You know
The Brill Building in Manhattan?
yeah.
It was a teeny bit before my time. It was existing when I was 10 and 15, but I never went up there to work. I was in the building once, maybe connected with a songwriting project, but maybe that would have been 1960. But it was a little before my time, but there was a lot that went on in that building.
Yeah, it was kind of on its way down as you were coming up. What about the Latin influence in New York City with all the Cuban rhythms and everything? Were you ever involved with any group for mixing that stuff up?
I was. Upstate New York, 110 miles from New York City, was a place called the Catskills. And in that area, Catskills Mountains, there must have been 100 hotels. And they're all within, 20 square miles, something like that. And from the 40s all through the mid 60s, these hotels all had bands. Some of them had 5 bands, some had 3, some had a dance band, a jazz band, a pop band, and many of them had authentic Latin bands. So the second year that I was playing up there when I was 16, there was a band called Larry Harlow, and Larry Harlow had a great Latin band, and they played, and then our jazz group played, me and Dave Liebman and Bob Moses. And then the next year, I was in another hotel called the Raleigh, and I was in a jazz trio with a singer, and then the band opposite us was Eddie Palmieri. And Eddie Palmieri's a great Latin pianist, and we became friends. And I taught him jazz, and he taught me Latin.
Great Latin musician, Eddie Palmieri.
Yeah, he let me sit in with his band. It was hard locking in with the congas and the timbales at the time. I'm pretty good at it now. And yes, it will show up in my playing time to time,
Sounds like, Mike, you approached your whole thing the opposite of the way Don Shirley did his.
How did he do his?
He went from classical to pop.
But he played some jazz, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, classical to jazz more than pops. Yeah, my mistake. I was just thinking about that, his transition. I guess he was quite the classical player.
Well, mine is not that different. I mean, I went from classical to jazz. It's just that I wasn't doing like heavy concertizing, local concerts here and there at the schools and all that kind of stuff. I think I needed that music as an infrastructure to let me understand harmony and melody and rhythm and appreciate the virtuosity of a Chopin etude or Beethoven sonata or a Liszt etude. And it was very inspiring, some of that music, because those guys were beyond genius, They were our Train and Miles Davis of that time. And so I learned a lot from them. And I still use a lot of that knowledge when I'm composing. It's kind of like we're talking now. You get an idea and you say it. You don't plan out the words. You have a question or a thought, and then it spontaneously flows out of you. That's how the music is. But to get there with the music, it's a lot of homework, especially if you're using a jazz or a classical vocabulary. You're only using a pop or rock vocabulary. You can get there in a few years. With the jazz or classical, you start to talk about decades, Although in this day and age, I'm hearing amazing kids at 10, 12, 14, 16, so it's not decades. They have YouTube and they learn and they absorb, and it's pretty fascinating, actually, what you see out there.
Amazing.
How do you like Chick Corea and where he's gone with music?
I mean, I think he's a brilliant musician, great pianist. He produced my first jazz album, and we were in Israel and Japan together. Sometimes we'd play piano and synthesize it together. I'd be on one, he'd be on the other. My wife managed him for 2-3 years. He's as good as they get. I mean, your most famous jazz pianists of our period of time, Herbie Hancock, Keith Jarrett, Chick Corea. Those are the names that come to mind, you know. Bud Powell and Art Tatum and Oscar Peterson and Wynton Kelly. So you had great pianists then too. And then when you go earlier than that, you're moving into Dixieland and Jelly Roll Morton and things early like that. You go right before that, you're in like Debussy and Ravel and you know, composers like that. There's some sort of a lineage there, you know.
Is it true that Art Tatum learned to play by putting his hands on a player piano? I heard that he was maybe partially blind or something like that, and he learned by putting his hands on the keys of a player piano and had that instant, I hear it, I feel it, I hear it, I feel it. And first time I heard recordings of him playing things like Tiger Rag, oh my gosh, just...
Well, look, it's spellbinding. I'm sure that's one of the anecdotal stories with him. I'm sure that's one of the ways he learned. He was probably 3/4 blind. You could see a little. But you have to think with him and Oscar Peterson, because they would be the two greatest jazz virtuosos. They might not be the deepest jazz players, like Bill Evans goes deeper for me and things like that. But in terms of virtuosity, there's no one who could top a Tiger Rag. It's just insane. And I think that came about from 10 to 12 hours a day for numerous years. And coming into this life with a God-given gift, you know, that was freaky.
Huge hands.
Huge hands.
Huge hands. Yeah.
Just last week, I downloaded about 20 or 30 of his transcriptions, his solos, because, you know, since he passed, which is many years, people with great ears have notated his playing, you know. And but in the 60s, by ear, I used to take off some of his solos. Took a long time, and then I would I learned enough to imitate him, let's say, superficially, but it would sound more than that to a listener. And then I combined it kind of with my own style. But it's just it's almost like freaky, you know. It's like, how does someone play that speed with that cleanliness and that locked in rhythms? It's like, it's almost uncanny.
Yeah.
It's like when you see Michael Jordan and he looks like he's flying in the air and time stops, you know. And how did he do that? It's not normal.
Did Art Tatum play a lot of stride with his left hand?
Oh my God, yeah.
That was, you know, pretty much.
In fact,
and Monk did that too.
In fact, when he played with bands and didn't use as much left hand, which he still did, it was nowhere as impressive as when he played by himself, because he was self-contained. His actual improvisation and small band stuff was still a little bit like what he played solo. He hadn't moved really into the bebop era, so his improvisations are more runs and arpeggios and very fast scales and licks, and it formed a style, but it's not as complex harmonically as the people who came after him, you know. But that's natural, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Along with Oscar Peterson, do you see Thelonious Monk as kind of coming after Tatum with stride, but using dissonance and, you know, the minor seconds and everything?
Well, you know, that's how it passes down the line. You know, Duke Ellington and Monk and, you know, they had chops and they had fingers, but it was of a different nature. They were digging deeper into the essence of the music. So like watching Tatum would be almost like a freak show in a way, like how does someone do it, and you walk away. Or you go see Monk, or who I saw live, or Bill Evans. You kind of walk out, your soul is kind of nourished. So it's a little different.
When you say digging deeper, are you also talking about extensions of harmony and maybe more open voices using clusters and things like that, as opposed to what Art Tatum was doing? as far as digging deeper, more into the harmony of it?
The digging deeper, as I was expressing it, would include that, but it was really just a little more depth to the actual music. More, it was in a way more spiritual, or just I find myself using the word deeper. It stays with you longer. It's not so much a phenomenon as like, oh my God, this really has moved me. I'm wowed. I'm like, oh my God, how does he do that? I'm going to kill myself. But I'm Bill Evans or Chopin or Monk. It's kind of like, oh, they're touching something a little deeper. That's just me,
Yeah.
Mike, what is your you do a lot of different things, we've learned that through Lynn all these years. What is your preference for a size of a band and combination of instruments when you're playing?
I like trio. It's my favorite context. Sometimes I enjoy adding a sax or trumpet or both. I like playing solo concerts to this day. And sometimes I can express myself more with solo piano concerts because I'm not hindered by other musicians. But if they're great musicians like Joe LaBarber or people like that, there's no end to what I'll find that I wouldn't find alone. So trio, I would have to say, has been my favorite context. Well, I played in big bands, and I played in Lee Komitz's octet in the mid-70s, late 70s. And he passed away recently. This is my engineer. Let me take this call quickly. Don't go anywhere.
Mike, when you work in a trio and you're working with a good bass player, and so you're not responsible for your left hand, who do you like for bass players to interact with in a trio situation?
Well, I've been blessed to have played with Mark Johnson, who was Bill Evans' bass player the last 3 years of his life. I've played with Eddie Gomez, who was Bill Evans' bass player in the early 60s, Steve Swallows. It's endless. Anyone who's done their homework and is a dedicated true artist who's mastered their instrument and has something to say aesthetically and musically and spiritually, I love playing with, and we'll find each other's coordinates.
There's a young kid out there now that you've played with, Marlon Martinez. That's up and coming. It's pretty good.
Marlon's great, coming along very nicely, and I've watched his evolution because he used to sit in my classes when I taught at Coburn.
Yeah,
he's very, very good, and he was very influenced by Stanley Clarke and Christian McBride, who's one of the greatest bass players out there now. He played in one of my bands, 1985 or 6. He was 14. His mom had to drive him to our concert in Long Island.
Have you worked with Buster Williams at all?
In 1963 at Slugs, the place that Lee Morgan was shot by his wife.
Yeah. Yep.
Great bass player.
Amazing.
Did you run into a guy named Jeff Berlin?
I played with Jeff too. He's also a great fusion bass player.
Yeah.
We met him when we were playing in Boston.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He was working with John Scofield.
Right. I mean, he's kind of another one of those bass freaks,
Yeah.
He was very inspired by
Jocko.
By Jocko, but also you mentioned him a minute ago.
Stanley
He was
Clarke.
the bass player in the 70s that was
Stanley Clarke.
Stanley Clarke. Yeah, he was
Stanley
very
Clarke.
much influenced by Stanley Clarke at the time.
1978 to 1980, I was in Stanley Clarke's band.
Really? Wow.
Wow.
I have a hidden past. I don't tell the rock people that. They get very distressed.
What did you think of the West Coast groups in the early '50s that abandoned the piano, like Mulligan and Conant and Baker and Mulligan's 13-piece big band had no chords, just horns and bass.
They were great. I loved that music.
You weren't offended, right?
No, because I could play the piano with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Elvin did the same thing when we saw him in Boston. He just had two saxes and bass, and all the harmony was happening between the bass and the two saxes. Very much an open sound, you know.
What year did you see them there?
That was probably around, I'm guessing around 77, maybe a little earlier.
Yeah, those were friends of mine. I actually played with him in, I think, 71. But he had a bass player and sax and drums, and I played piano for 3 nights with him.
That's quite a piece of history.
You know,
Both of you, quite a piece of history.
my career is very strange because a lot of people I just played with one night or one day or 3 days because I'm always moving around, and in a lot of ways I get bored quickly. So I played with Freddie Hubbard for 3 months. I played with Stan Getz one night, Mel Torme one night, Nancy Wilson one night, Elvin Jones 3 nights, Lee Konitz 7 times, Mike Brecker twice. You know, so it adds up to a lot of artists. But those magic moments of one show or a jam session, they stay with you your whole life because of the greatness of the musicians.
Hey, Mike, could you name somebody you haven't played with?
You know, they're all dead, and that's probably why I didn't play with them. And I wish I did, you know. I wish I did.
I'm Joe, by the way. I don't know. I haven't been introduced to you. I was a guitar player in the Gringos.
Nice to
I'm
meet
a guy who plays by ear.
you. Know, that's a big talent to be able to do that.
Well, I don't know about that, but I was brought up in St. Louis, and I used to go to East St. Louis and play in the black clubs, you know, and that's where I learned to play, you know. Our group, the Gringos, was kind of like, to me, I kind of express it as like a wagon wheel, because the horn players were all, you know, learned. They had learned their instruments and everything like that. And when we got together, you know, Alan played with bands. Clyde he's played with bands. He's a great drummer. All of us felt like we played good in some way, but it was like a wagon wheel because we had all these different things. Like we started when I first joined the band, we started playing right away Chicago stuff, you know, because of the 3 horns, and we had them nailed, you know, and I was really proud of that, you know.
Nice. I mean, certainly Lynn has told me hundreds of stories through the years. So, and I've heard the music, and yeah, you guys were very, very good, you know.
Yeah.
My friend Dave Liebman, who ended up playing with Miles Davis, we grew up together. He was a sax player. He went off and played rock for a while with a group called 10 Wheel Drive.
Oh yeah.
And they were out in New York. I remember at the time when he did it, you know. I got to see them once play, you know. And I was also friends with some of the guys from Blood, Sweat, and Tears, but that's a different kind of a thing. But Chicago would be the closest to you guys, obviously.
Yeah, that and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and
Yeah.
Electric Flag.
And Tower of Power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you familiar with any of the Southern rock groups?
Very, very slightly, you know.
Right.
The thing is, these days I'll listen to things that I should have listened to 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. I was so preoccupied with mastering the piano, and because I liked so much music, I was always so busy learning.
Right.
I know much less listening-wise than most people who've heard a million groups and know all about them. But I certainly could these days go to YouTube and in 5 minutes understand what somebody's talking about. And
right.
I do that quite a bit now, and things that used to cause a blankness in my mind because I didn't know what somebody was talking about, I hear 4 bars and I get it, for better or worse, you know?
Right.
Have you arranged for horns in any of your original compositions at all?
A few times along the way, and I did one big band album, and but that's not my exact area. But using MIDI data in my synthesizer, I have plotted out um, horn parts and string parts, and I have given it to my arrangers and orchestrators to turn them into nice parts, but they were my notes. You know, I know enough to be dangerous, but it's not even dangerous. I know enough because I know harmony, but there's an art to great string writing. There's an art to great horn writing. I've always noticed that the trombone players and trumpet players sometimes were the best arrangers in all those different bands through those years, you know, because they're right in those sections. They get to understand how to make those voicings and this and that. But I've studied some of those books on arranging and Jerry Garcia and this one and that one. It's, you know, it's an art. So, you know, you can't do everything and you can't be everything to everybody. So you have to pick the things that, number one, you love the most, and number two, that you've also done your homework on. So in some ways, as much as I have a very broad career and worked with so many people and played so much music, it's really mostly all based around the piano. So I've really kept it extremely narrow. You know, there are people who are great orchestrators who play piano, who are great conductors, great composers, and they do all those things, but I'm not interested in conducting at all, very slightly in orchestration, very slightly in arranging, although I'm doing that automatically on the piano because it's the best instrument there is to orchestrate on. But I've given some of my piano orchestration, my piano pieces to orchestrators, and they've turned them into things that really blew my mind because it's another art. Guys who are great orchestrators and arrangers, those guys spend as much time on their craft as I did on my craft. So sometimes you have to just decide, what should I put my attention on? And most importantly, what's exciting me the most so I could hang in there for 10, 12 hours a day or 8 hours or 4 hours or 2 hours, you know? Because if you really don't love something, you feel a little resentful when you're just practicing it over and over and it's not where your heart is, you know. So,
I could never do that.
right, and it's not for everybody, right? And look,
Right.
when I would work with David Bowie, we'd be in the studio working on a track for 2 weeks, and he'd show up one Thursday afternoon, 4 o'clock, listen to the track, sing one take, and leave. You know, he was just a natural singer. Everything was in tune. He knew what he wanted, and he was gone.
Certainly, the piano's a great instrument to see music theory on. You can hear it on the guitar and play it on the guitar, but the visual thing of seeing the theory on the piano, along with hearing it, I think is great for students, you know.
Well, there's nothing better than that, and I kind of feel sometimes that I'm cheating because I have that ability to see it all on the piano, and other people who are playing single notes, they're not aware for the most part of all the intricacies of the counterpoint and the harmonies and all that. Some are, and also, like you say, with guitar, you don't see it as well, but you look at the piano, what a great instrument to learn harmony on and how to compose on, you know. And a lot of the rock guys who even are very good guitar players, they'll sit at the piano and write their music.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
You enjoying your time off the road?
Well, we were cut short, so it pissed me off. Aside from losing a fortune of money, we were just warming up, starting to really sound good. But now that I'm back home, I love being home with Susan and when I get to see the rest
With
of
us.
What'd you say?
I said with us.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. The time, normally when I'm traveling, you don't have as much time. There's a lot of time now, which has given me a little more time for the music and to compose and be with the family. There's something, it's almost like a reboot. You have a chance to really relook at things, examine your life, and
Right.
we come out of it stronger, you know.
Mhm.
Well,
Hopefully.
I can tell you, it's really been a privilege for us, to get the chance to talk to you. Somebody is, you're a big guy. As far as we're concerned, you're very, you're right up there with the best of them.
Thank you. You know, you think about it, how many people dedicate their whole life to one thing and it's continually learning. You know, you go to be a doctor, you might put in 10, 15 years of dues and then you start working and you keep up with it. But with the music, if you take it at the level that I have, it's serious business and you're always in it one way or the other. And that has its profits at the end. I always was questioning, was it my knowledge and my technique and hard work that made me good, or did I have an additional gift and talent? And some people would put more attention when they'd hear me play on my gift and talent, and some people would say, well, it's obvious you've practiced the piano 150,000 hours, you should be good. So I guess it's some sort of a mixture. But the only analogy I could give is if I was to pick up the guitar or the oboe, I would sound like shit. So that must mean I did a lot of work on the piano, so I'm good at it. But I think there's a gift. I was meant to play it. Let's put it that way. But I've seen a lot of talented people who haven't done the hard work, and there's a cutoff point when that happens. But some of the music they play, it's not necessary that they be able to be John McLaughlin or Leonard Bernstein. You use what you have for what you have. I don't have 10 concertos and 14 sonatas under my fingers. The potential is there, but I'm not playing that kind of music anymore. So I'm playing improvised music. So I need to be tuned into that world, So it has to do with context.
What did you think of Andre Previn? Now, he was what you would consider a jazz player, but his technique to me was just impeccable.
Well, he was a jazz player. He was one of my first influences at 14, and he could play jazz. He was good. It's just that he was one of these genius kind of guys, so he could play classical, he could play jazz, and then he becomes a conductor, He also did the score, I think, for My Fair Lady or something like that. I mean, he wrote the orchestration. He's one of those guys. I mean, I think he passed away this year or last year, but he's one of those guys. Every once in a while, you have a guy he's bigger than jazz, bigger than classical, he's bigger than composing. Leonard Bernstein was like that.
Yeah.
And he just was a natural jazz pianist. Is he as good as the guys we were talking about? No, but his natural gift at jazz was very good. But because he didn't do it all the time, it just didn't go as far as he could have taken. If he only did jazz his whole life, he'd be like the guys we've been talking about. But that wasn't his calling, He was meant to be in the classical world and conduct the Pittsburgh Symphony and all that kind of stuff. And but a very, very big talent. There's some extraordinary talents out there. Some of them know nothing about jazz. In fact, they look down upon it, no less rock. Some are very open to it. It's the old story of as many opinions as there are assholes.
So,
Do you remember when Leonard Bernstein had kind of a regular TV show a long time ago? It was black and white.
For
It
kids.
might have been on PBS or something like
Now
that.
it's Lawrence Welk you're talking about, Clyde. Come on.
Well, I love Lawrence Welk. I love polka and I love Lederhosen.
And I saw a lot of those TV shows in real time when he did it back in New York, way before it was on PBS. They were just on like CBS or something. We would wait for them, those shows. He did a bunch of them. Now I've reviewed a few because they're all on the internet, which on YouTube, which is great. He was a great teacher, very good pianist. He could not improvise jazz like Andre Previn, but he could write jazz things that you hear in West Side Story and some of his pieces. He understood the harmony, but he actually was, a classical guy, but great pianist, very good, amazing conductor. And Dudamel, who's a young guy now in his 30s, who conducts the LA Phil, is one of those kind of brilliant conductors. I met him a few months ago. The guy has the pieces he conducts, 9 Mahler symphonies and Beethoven. He's got them memorized and knows who's coming in when and the parts. And
Here's every part.
It's like a freak show. I don't even feel like I could play music when I watch him, and yet he probably wishes he could do what I did on the piano.
There you go.
And then I wish I could play the guitar by ear. Like you. So it's like, the grass is always greener. Just a very huge talent comes to word. That's the word that comes to my mind. Huge artistry, and he's a very good conductor. And a lot of his classical stuff is not appreciated because people couldn't handle it because he did so many things so well. But you'll see over the next years, people will realize he was a great, great composer. And his West Side Story symphonic version is beyond phenomenal, which is a piece that orchestras play around the country, and it's the themes that he arranged and orchestrated from West Side Story, but because there's no vocals particularly, he goes all out with the harmony and melody and rhythm and it's to die for. He also wrote the score for On the Waterfront, which was the Marlon Brando movie.
Yeah.
He did that score. It's actually over the top. It's too much music for the movie, but they did that then. The film composers in the 50s, they were a little over the top, and it would get in the way of the movie, but it's an amazing score.
When you talk about West Side Story, Buddy Rich's band did a medley from West Side Story that they played live in performance.
I saw it.
And one of the things when I saw Buddy Rich, of course, I'm a drummer and everybody's impressed with his ability, his chops with his hands and everything. But I was impressed the first part of his show when I saw him, that he played so tastefully in cradling that band and supporting the horn section and never overplayed. And he played so musically, and the arrangements with that band were really musical.
Yeah, he was great. I have a Buddy Rich story because I had 3 months of college to finish back in the 60s, and I got a call to be his pianist. And I was in Brooklyn, and they were rehearsing in Philadelphia or New Jersey. And I got in the car, and I was prepared to drop out of school, even though I had done 4 years of music. But this is Buddy Rich. And I went into the hall and sat in the audience listening as he was rehearsing the band. And it must have been a rough day, because when he finished one song, he was screaming at the sax player at the top of his lungs.
You should hear the bus trip.
That's one of the. It's like that, and then he plays another song and does the same thing to the trumpet player. I actually got up, got in my car, and went back and finished college.
Amen.
I didn't want to be abused, but I would have liked to have played with him, but I just didn't like that vibe. I mean, the music meant so much to him. But he was a bit of a control freak, and the energy in those days were darker. People got results by screaming rather than some compassion. But so I kind of missed opportunity, But I've seen him play many times, and I always loved his bands. And of course, he was very supportive as a player. And then to add that insane virtuosity, he just had those amazing chops. It was just unbelievable.
We saw him give a drum clinic in New Orleans in partnership with Louis Bellson.
Yeah, I saw both of those bands play opposite each other, and Louis was a great drummer and a lovely guy. Buddy, again, like we were talking about some of these others, one of those freaks,
Yeah.
And I'm sure, like those bus tapes that we all know, and Dave Carpenter, who was one of the bass players in my band, was one of the guys, Lynn, that he was screaming at.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And, you know, and even when I played with the Nine Inch Nails, on breaks, they used to play me those tapes because everybody got such a big kick out of those tapes. I honestly don't believe that's who the essence of the guy was. I think that was his short fuse, and people got a big kick out of seeing it when he did it. You couldn't play music so great if he lived that way 24/7. But
Right.
I think he took the music so personally, and when it wasn't right, it just triggered something. And I've met other musicians like that, that just when it wasn't right, they'd have a little bit of a breakdown. I must admit, it's happened to me, but I know how to sort of bite my tongue and shut up. But I have lost it when the music hasn't been right, because you're in a vibe and a flow and you're not getting it, and you just don't know what to do, so you kind of explode.
Mm.
Yeah.
How much, when you have your situation, when it's your band, do you just feel like you can delegate responsibility to the great players you've chosen to work with and don't have to exercise as much control because you've chosen players?
The secret is in choosing the right people, so then you don't have to micromanage them. When you don't choose the right one, then you usually get short-tempered. If you choose the right ones, you could lay back and let them do their thing, because that's what delegation is, and that's how you run an organization. All the bands I've had, in the early days, I had fights and arguments and this and that. But for many, many years, every single band I put together, and that's got to be 150 bands, have all been great. And there's almost nothing to say except, let's rehearse this music, do this, do that. And the early days when I would correct and criticize, it was always a nightmare, because a musician doesn't want to be told what to do. So choose the people who you know, who give you the product you want, and then you're good to go.
Sound
That's
advice.
good. I like that.
Sound advice. Sound advice. It's really good to hear that.
You got
But
it.
Mike, it's been a pleasure having you on, and I know your time is really, really valuable. The guys really appreciate it. Thank you so much for devoting the time to talk to us about your career and your jazz life, because you know the rock and roll world is out there. People can read all about it in different formats and what have you, but the jazz world and your existence in that is something that's very, very special, and I appreciate it because I've been a part of it.
Well, you know, I was given a concert at the Brooklyn Museum 2 years ago because there was a Bowie exhibition there, but it was a solo concert. And I found myself closing the show for 20 minutes and saying to the audience, everybody knows me as David Bowie's pianist, but I'm going to play a medley of music of what I practiced the prior 10 years before Bowie to show you why he wanted me. And consequently, I ended up playing a lot of jazz and classical, and I think I brought them to understand that he liked what I was bringing to his music. In a way, it was a synopsis of the jazz and classical world. So it was a very interesting experiment, and I felt very good about doing that for them. And that, and they liked it. My wife at the time said you should have played more Bowie. But, you know, it was a solo concert. I had played some Bowie, but I wanted them to know the roots of where I had come from.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I thought you were a pretty good master of ceremonies, too. I saw you in Boston with the guys.
You saw the Boston show?
Yeah, last year's show.
Oh, yeah, it was a good show.
Yeah.
I like being an MC, you know. I've always led my trios. There's not tons to say when I'm playing jazz shows. I'll introduce the guys and most of the time play. But because I have stories connected with Bowie and people want to be part of the inside world, I remember different stories and I share them. And those fans, they eat it up because they only knew him only from the music. But I knew him from life and as a friend and as a great artist, you know.
There's a new commercial out about the everybody being cramped up because of the COVID thing, and it's under pressure. the song. You know, they use the song, and it's a really neat thing. Those families doing all kinds of things, and they're playing Bowie's song. Well, you know,
impression.
that was co-written, right?
Yeah,
That was Freddie Mercury and Bowie. But
I was wondering if that song would get used because naturally there's a lot in it that would reflect these times. Yeah, him and Freddie were not serious when they put that together, but it turned into a gem.
yeah,
They were apparently very drunk at the record session.
It seemed like you had no problem at all working with someone like Slick on guitar, who's maybe not classically or jazz trained, but certainly does the job as far as the sounds necessary for Bowie's arrangement.
A long time ago, I let go of my knowledge or my jazz sophistication or classical sophistication and never used it against musicians. I just did what I did. And when a guy is a great player, that's all I'm happy with. And that's all I need. I don't need the other. So there's no need to have that kind of elitist or snobbish attitude, you know?
Sometimes the thing with somebody like Slick, it's not like he's virtuoso as far as very fast, but the color of what he adds with his sustain in a certain part of a song is the right thing.
He just knows what to play when.
Yeah.
That's why he worked with John Lennon. That's why he worked with Bowie.
Right.
He's a bit of an asshole to work with on the road.
I thought he was. I thought he might be. You know, he makes some mighty fine guitars up in New York. He's got his own place now. He builds guitars.
Does he?
Yeah. And he's you know, like all the hardware he puts on them is like brass, and it's not like this cheap stuff you get from China. You know, it's like really brass. It's been milled, and he uses really good hardware, and he has several different models of guitars, and he sells them for a very good price. You know, I mean, he'll have guitars up there, and all of a sudden they're sold out. And then a little while later, he'll get a bunch more, and they're sold out. So he's doing something right, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Earl is he's only played a very small window of guitar music, but he's done it his entire life. So he's very, very good at that little window. He's not a very broad guitar player, so it's sometimes very hard teaching him a song, or he forgets a lot of songs we recorded back in the 70s. But give him an E chord on a blues type thing, and he's just amazing.
Glam rock. He plays glam rock really great.
He does. He does.
Yeah.
We made a lot of great music together. There's an album that came out called Cracked Actor. It got released in the last couple of years, but we recorded at the Amphitheater in Los Angeles in 1973. His solo on Sweet Thing Candidate is remarkable. And you could hear that on that recording. You could probably hear it on YouTube, but very impressive.
Wow.
Have you worked with jazz guitar players like McLaughlin, John McLaughlin?
I have.
How was John McLaughlin to work with? Was he doing bebop at the time as opposed to fusion?
When I played with Stanley Clarke, he was our opening act. He just was playing fusion. He was phenomenal. And then I did a gig with Stanley Clarke, Jeff Beck, and John McLaughlin together. Again, like one of those one-offs that I was talking about.
Wow.
How about Jocko? Did you ever play with Jocko?
I did play with Jocko.
Right.
Wow.
He was crazy.
Tony Mitchell?
I did. That's one I missed. I would have loved that.
Yeah.
Well, you did Jocko, so that's good enough.
Yeah.
And, the drummer, Vinnie Caliuta, called me one day, let's put a trio together with Jocko. It was very tempting. This goes back to the 80s. But Jocko was so crazy then that I passed.
Yeah.
That would have been quite a musical combination, you with Vinny and Jocko, had it happened, would have been amazing.
Amazing. I was a little scared also, so it's not only because he was crazy. I should have just gone for it. There was a gig with Joe Henderson, the sax player, in 1972 that I turned down because I didn't think I was prepared. And then I heard the pianists on it a few years later, and they were excellent, but I realized I could have done it. But sometimes fear makes us hold back.
Right.
Yeah. But timing is everything. Sometimes it's the right time, sometimes not. That's really what happened with our band when Jim reformed the band, the Gringos. It was the timing of it. And that 9-year stretch, it's not always something you can make happen, but it's almost like fate certain times that certain people play together and that chemistry and magic happens and has its season and it's special, and you can't make it happen, but when it's happening, you got to ride that wave and you just enjoy the heck out of it. You know,
We're still all friends 50 years later.
well, you're not my friend, but most everybody else is.
To all you guys.
Impressive. Yes.
Again, thanks, Mike. I appreciate
Thanks so much.
you coming
Thank
on.
you, Mike.
Talking stories.
The questions were great and good to share. Because normally in interviews, I mentioned it last week, you know, people don't ask, we don't talk about Art Tatum for 10 minutes or Monk or how I write a classical piece. It's always about Aladdin Sane with me playing with David Bowie on the albums and how did you do that? And they're fine. It's just that I've said that 5,000 times. These conversations you could only have with musicians who appreciate music. So I thank you guys too.
Yeah.
Thanks
We'll
a
be
lot.
continuing to follow your career. We sure enjoy it.
So in some ways, just warming up.
Oh, yeah.
I saw so many
Getting better
people.
like fine wine.
What?
We're just getting better like fine wine.
I hope so. I hope so. Get out of the fucking house someday and play again, you know?
My
I
music,
finally found
We
it.
hope you get back up this way, Mike.
Say
If
again?
possible. We hope you get back up this way.
I'm sure we will. We'll see you guys again.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me and good luck
thank
with
you so much.
Good
Thanks,
luck
Mike.
to you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, Mike.
Bye.
Bye
Thanks.
now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.